Also, I have this speech shot too.
You have what?
Wanting to speech the
Oh,
speech
speech.
chat is 22.
Mhm.
Uh, let me let me do um let me do this.
I think you have to invite people up on stage, and then you can see some of my stuff, I think.
Yeah. The BIGFOOT is awesome. Now it's lady. Okay. Okay. Do you want to ask questions
The
now?
BIGFOOT Well, if people want to ask questions, they can. I don't care, Clint.
Yeah. Now it's lady. Okay. Do you want to ask questions now?
BIGFOOT Well, if people want to ask questions, they can. I don't care, Clint.
Now it's lady.
I don't know.
Okay. Do you want to ask questions now?
BIGFOOT Well, if people
I
I just sent Bigfoot researcher Ron. How's that?
Yeah, that's good.
So you can type it in there or whatever for people. Bigfoot researcher Ron. I just sent Bigfoot researcher Ron. How's that? So you can type it in there.
That's good.
So you can type it in there or whatever
It's
for people.
in the Discord chat. Oh, it's
I don't see it, but if you say it's there, it's there. I just sent Bigfoot researcher Ron. How's that?
that's good. Yeah,
Type it in there.
that's good.
So you can type. If you got your YouTube channel up, you might put it there too. I don't know, Clint.
You send me in a on Zello or my phone
On YouTube,
on YouTube.
if you're doing it both ways, I don't care.
Let's okay. Okay. I don't see the pets.
Well, if people want to ask questions, they can ask them, but I don't think anybody's in the channel, are they?
Just one, but
Well, if you ask a question, you can either read it or something. I don't know. Or they can come on. You can invite them in to come and talk, and I can talk directly to them. I don't care, Clint. That's up to you.
yeah. Oh, come on. It could do. It could put your camera on.
You know what?
Maybe it can put your camera on. You put your camera on.
Well, maybe I could do that. Let's see. Turn on the light.
1 second. Let me do this.
Well, maybe I could do that. Turn on the light.
Trying to figure out how to do this.
There you go, Clint. How's that?
That's good. The Sasquatch. So the Sasquatch. Like what do you think about the Sasquatch?
Well, I think there's a lot of things, Clint, that really can be said about them. I mean, you can look at them from, the historical viewpoint of around the world or, within the U.S. or particular states. And some states are no more, we'll just say have more activity that's reported, like particularly out west, the Washington, Northern California area, Oregon, that's type places with pretty rugged terrain. And I guess for the most part, unless you get way up in the mountains or something, pretty well have some pretty stable temperatures and a lot of moisture, and animals like deer and things that they can speed on, and so a lot of people see them um, along roadways or back off in the woods. So they're seen all over the United States, but some places they're seen more than other places, and then you got other cryptids out there too, like Dogman and some flying cryptids out there too. It just depends on where you go, Clint. It's kind of like there's like a almost a perfect environment for all kinds of animals out there and living creatures, and some of them they can't take real cold, but they can take hot, and vice versa. So it just depends on where you're at and what you may experience. But pretty well, if it was a little cryptid, let's just say like um, a little person like the Indians believe in to talk about, you're probably not going to see those too much because they're so much smaller. It's kind of like you're going to spot a dollar bill floating across a parking lot before you spot a dime, 50 feet away. So there may just be as many of those little cryptids as big cryptids, maybe more. We just don't see them as much. Depends on where you are. If that makes sense.
Yeah. So like, so how about the baby Bigfoot?
Well, you don't see many of them, Clint. Just like um, people that where I've lived in the country, and we have a lot of coyotes. You may see some younger coyotes that would be considered like teenager or something like that. Younger, but you don't see baby coyotes. They're going to be in their den and whatever. So if you see a small Bigfoot, it's probably going to be with its mother, and a lot of times they're either clinging to their back, and I think they're holding on to the hair, or she may have her baby, in her arms, something like that. So they're just so much smaller, so they're not as noticeable um, as a human. And typically, if it is a baby, it's going to be seen with a human. So, or when I say human or an adult, people don't leave their babies here and there, and neither does Bigfoot, neither do coyotes or other animals. They typically just don't leave their young to themselves. Not saying they don't, but I don't think that Bigfoot does.
That's so so what if like someone what if someone like hiking and they saw one?
I don't think they're going to really see him, Clint, because um, the parents, typically the females of most species are very protective of their young. So you're not going to find them. I don't think they're going to be with their mom, um, or she's going to stash them nearby. Just like parents do, they put the baby in the crib so they go, do the dishes or wash or whatever they need to do. So if they stash them, it's going to be in a way and out of the way place that they're probably not going to get discovered. So I've never heard of anybody finding a Bigfoot young one. I do. I have in the past heard stories where um, they had an encounter with a younger one, you know, um, maybe a few years old that's maybe is 3 foot high, 4 foot, something like that, a younger one, and very quickly their parents, in the stories that I've heard, kind of show up and get them out of there.
Mhm.
So you're not going to see
So
kind of things very often, if ever. If somebody sees Bigfoot, Clint, I can tell you that you can call them very lucky, and they have reasons sometimes to show themselves, maybe crossing the road. Maybe they want people to know they're in the area, and somebody doesn't believe in them, and all of a sudden you're faced with something that's almost 10 feet tall, and you're going to tell your friends, and they probably think you're a kook sometimes, or maybe they say, okay, well, you're not the only one. So there's enough information out there that most people know that of somebody with today's media, with Facebook and other accounts out there that are there for social media. Many people have had encounters with cryptids of some type, and so you can get on Facebook or some other page and learn about them and see that there's not just one or two, but there's thousands of people that have had these encounters with either Bigfoot or Dogman or something like the Man or some other cryptid, and it could be small people, you know, um, like the one I saw, my twin brother, Lenape is what the Comanche call them. They were about knee high, so it just depends, Clint.
Um, so like the like the results, you know, um, what's his name? John Patterson.
Well, tell me, you're talking about like the Patterson Gimlin film.
Yes, yes, his son is research
Well, there's
the Bigfoot.
yeah, the one you're talking about, I think, is Scott Carpenter's son.
Yeah,
You
Scott
know,
Carpenter.
um, he calls himself T Carb, Travis Carpenter, and I've talked to him. Not much, but I've talked directly to him. On podcasts and things. Um, and we talked about some things. I told him, about granite and running water and parapsychology and those type of things. And his dad, I can say, he researched Bigfoot for I don't know, 5 to 10 years, somewhere in there, more or less. And he had a lot of experiences, and it's like anything else. You get out in the woods and there's a lot of snakes around or whatever. You're going to have some close encounters with those snakes and whatever. It's just the way it is because you're out there. And Scott, he had a lot of encounters and had questions, if I recall correctly. And so he started investigating and going into the woods in Tennessee, I believe. And anyways, he started seeing things and hearing things, and then he came up with putting a camera on his shoulder that's a lot like kind of like this, but it's got a stand, and he turned it around backwards, and it's a gimbal, so it moves up and down, and with your body movement, but it doesn't really record it and make it shaky. And so he realized that a lot of times that when he got images of Bigfoots, that they were behind him, peeking out of a tree or something like that. So
Okay, one. This is search.
the cert book, yeah, I've got the manual for it. The instructor's manual that came out in 2019. Don't know if I get another one, but probably will at some point in time. So, anyways, back to Scott. I don't know how many hours and days or what he got a video, but after he would get back, he'd look at that video and found out that they were peeking out at him around corners and other things, and he caught many different colors of them from I think the typical dark color from black or dark brown or maybe red, and then even some cream colored tan ones and whatever, so he caught a lot of different colored ones here and there. And he had some issues at his house with him where they would come visit him at his house and slap his walls and things and then leave feathers for him and taking the dog's dog food, as I recall. And he had a little bit different attitude than I have about him. And but he'd had a lot more experience with him than I've had. I've never had any bad experiences with him, but if I had uh, if I weren't involved with all the people that had been involved with in life, I could certainly see I would have a different attitude than somebody that had thousands of encounters with other people. And there's definitely some good ones out there, and definitely some bad ones. And I think that um, depending upon you and the environment and what they're trying to do and want to do for the day, and if you're interfering, they're probably going to be a little upset with you. You know. So I never bothered them, as far as I know. I only encroached in their territory, we'll say that one time, and ended up they were whistling at us, and we thought it were people. This is many years ago, Clint, over 40 years ago, and we thought it was somebody whistling at us, and come to find out Bigfoot's whistle at people. A lot of people say that now. I didn't know that back then. And then eventually a large object, was thrown in the water. And so we figured, a large object in water and people whistling at you, it had to be human beings. But come to find out, pretty well we believe now that was Bigfoot, that was most likely doing it. I can't say for sure. I didn't find any evidence, but um, we were well armed and had guns and whatever. So I don't think somebody would just mess with us, because they might get shot. So
Well, like, so we have the we have the burn samples and the hell samples.
yeah, there's Scott Carpenter got some and collected them, and I don't know who he gave them to directly. Maybe um, Melville Ketchum, I think. And they had the DNA and hair samples, and it basically came back that it was maternal DNA, but older maternal DNA, from thousands of years ago. From what I understand, in some of the samples, I can't say every sample. And then the hair samples turned out that they were kind of like human hair, so they were kind of different, but a lot like human hair. And so they could get the mitochondrial DNA, which is the mother's DNA, but they wouldn't get what they call the nuclear or paternal DNA, on the father's side. And it was just male, but they had nothing to compare it to. So some people speculate, that um, that was due to the mothers being bred by the angels that are Nephilim. So we can't say one way or another really, but it's certainly a possibility that it may have been. Maybe it isn't. A lot of people say that, according to the Bible, there were giants in the land, and that was the clue that these things are so big, and that they're much more muscular than humans in their build. So it must be Nephilim DNA, and I'm not sure that it is or isn't, but I'm open minded to it that it certainly could be. And when you start talking about that subject of is it Nephilim DNA, and some people are convinced it is, um, not all the Bigfoots walking around have six toes, like the Nephilim did. And so maybe there's some that do, some that don't. So we can't say for sure what they really are, Clint.
Uh, when you can like send me a text on Discord. I can like paste that. Um,
Like a what?
that one on my YouTube channel. Like, say why don't I say hello? Like what we talk about a foot all that.
Yeah, I'm not recording. You might be recording, but I really don't record. I'm just on, um, Discord, but there's um there's a lot of information about this stuff, Clint, and they're basically two types of people when you start talking about Bigfoot. The two separate camps. It's a lot like, Protestant Catholic, um, and that the one camp in the Bigfoot community, they believe that Bigfoot's nothing more than a undiscovered ape, but we know that we've discovered um, a number of big apes, if you want to call them that, and animals, like chimpanzees in the Congo, and some of them say people they weigh as much as 300 pounds, which is pretty big. And then you got things like the panda bear, and then the Highland gorillas and those kind of things. that they didn't really capture one till 70 years later, whatever, And so, um, if Bigfoot is an ape, he's certainly a lot smarter than the other ones. And that's where you have to start separating, Clint, and talking to witnesses and things that are Bigfoot investigators. It's not until they get out there in the field, and I've used a lot of equipment, in paranormal investigations, Clint. And the one thing that I've come to find out is that you might expect it. There are things that you can expect, like if you jumped in the water, you're going to get wet. So if you investigate ghostly hauntings, which I've been doing that for over 40 years as well, um, you're going to have some sort of ghostly activity, and it may or may not be an entity that causes the lights to blink, um, or the TV to turn on. Some of that stuff may be explainable, but when you start hearing and seeing doors slam and things that just for no reason pick up and go flying across the room, Ritz, I've seen, Clint, over the years, with other people present and nobody around when it happens. Objects sitting on a table. Um, that's what we'll call the woo. And
Ooh.
the woo is all the things that are strange that we can't explain. So there's all kinds of things that go along with Bigfoot, like people witnessing, orbs in the woods with them, or a flash of light, or a UFO that's seen overhead, and then all of a sudden you have Bigfoot. Can't say they came from the UFO, but it surely looks suspicious. Some people have claimed that when they're abducted by aliens or whatever, that there's a Bigfoot, that's in control or steering the UFO, spaceship, whatever you want to call it. So these are the things a lot of people don't want to talk about, and so they ignore it. And a lot of that's cognitive dissonance, which means they don't want to deal with the facts, so they just simply dismiss it. And a lot of people do that with a lot of things, whether it's politics or religion. So a lot of people that they don't believe exactly, um, if it doesn't sound right to them, they just throw it out the window, and you can't do that. So a lot of people that start out Bigfoot hunting, I would say, just depends on how avid they are at it. We're not talking somebody goes out 2 and 3 times a year, but somebody that's doing it, at least every month or maybe twice a month. It just depends. Um, they're sooner or later going to start seeing things and experiencing things they don't have the answer to, that animals don't do. Like vanishing before your eyes, and footprints that just end. And there's sometimes, like in the snow we've got on the ground now, that Bigfoot might walk, and then all of a sudden footprints just disappear. So where did he go? And so those are the things that you run into. And so you got two types: the types that believe there's some sort of a large ape of some sort, and then others say that no, they might be, Nephilim, or they have these psychic abilities. And most people believe you have those psychic abilities, there's a good chance that you got them from not God but the devil. So it can be a real toss up, Clint. You have people that believe in the woo, and they believe in um, you know, people having powers, and these things are demonstrated. So some
At
animals have it too, like
NWS1KC
tigers and
said,
infrasound and dolphins and
Hi.
whales, and sometimes tigers and the dolphins, I think, they can use infrasound to incapacitate prey. So never know, Clint. There's a lot of people that don't know these things, and they they're not really questioning. That's the thing you have to have, is an open mind. So a lot of times the people that really believe in the apes, they sooner or later have to deal with the woo, and they come around and say, well, there's more to it than what I thought. But a lot of people, if they got a real narrative, Clint, like they believe in the ape, they're just going to totally ignore it, and they don't want to look bad and change their mind. So
So come on, I right now I am trying to um edit like, like, edit, the edit the video name,
Yeah,
the name of what we talk about.
just you can call it Bigfoot conversation, Clint, or Bigfoot talk, if you want. I don't
How
care.
I can how I can show that.
Yeah, I'll send it to you in a text, what I would probably put. But Clint, that's the whole thing is that a lot of people have never gone out and they've never investigated Bigfoot. Um, and so they have opinions. Um, you know, they have opinions, but um, they've never investigated, and that's the bad thing, Clint.
Why is that though?
Well, because it'd be like me telling you a story, and you don't know if it's true or not. You're just taking that person's words, and a lot of times in reports like Project Blue Book did, there was a lot of information that never made the reports. So you don't know if you have all the information or not, if somebody lied. And so, you're going to have to go out there and investigate and find out for yourself. And a lot of people won't do that. Um, but they're going to watch a lot of YouTube videos, and could they be true? Yeah, some of them absolutely are. But then there's going to be times that people make fun of it, so they lie about it. So you're going to have to be able to um, discern, and tell the difference between what are lies and what are not. And Clint, I can tell you it's the same thing when I was doing ghost hunting, that people would have me calling on the phone and talk about spooky things going on in their house. It may be, you hear people walking maybe on the stairs or whatever, and lights turn on when everybody should be in bed, and whatever else, downstairs, and cabinet door slamming, and all these weird things happening, and they believe it, and they know it. They can't find a cause for it, but um, you know, if people lie about it, and let's say there's two types, one's lying, one's telling the truth, how do you know which one's which? Unless you experience it yourself. And that's what I'm saying. So when people call me up and they say these things, could it happen? Absolutely. Does it happen? Absolutely. But did it happen in your case? I can't go to court, and I've said this a million times, and raise my right hand and say that I know this to be fact. I don't know it to be fact. I'm just hearing it from these people. So it may or may
Okay.
not be correct.
So other people, other people think, oh, that they show the proof.
Well,
Why the people?
they want, everybody wants proof for what they believe in, but you really have to look at the evidence, and so it's kind of hard to fake a UFO landing, for example, if there's burnt ground and radiation. I mean, where'd they get the radiation from? And then there's maybe some unknown substance that's on the ground, and they take it and they look at it and say, well, we don't know what it is. So that's more believable, because it didn't come out of the periodical scale that we have with all the known elements, and it's not there. So you got to scratch your head and go, well, if it doesn't come from this earth, where did it come from? And what is it? We don't know, but maybe it's radioactive. So, you just have to consider the evidence, and um, kind of try to get as much information as you can when you investigate. And it's the same way. Anytime you investigate, get all the information you can, the who, what, when, where, how, and interview as many witnesses as you can through the events, Clint. And a lot of people, if they don't get it out in the field, don't do that, they're never going to have that telltale evidence for themselves. All they're doing is reading a report. A report could be right and it could be wrong. So you haven't got out and done your due diligence, but there's a lot of people that just look online. And Clint, I can tell you, with running Strange Oklahoma page, there's over 27,000 people on that page. So people say all kinds of things. Do I know the people? No. Did the report sound good? Yeah, they sound like it could be. And then come to find out, and it's happened to me, that I'm like, I don't know about that. And I scratch my head and I just don't feel something's right. And then come to find out that some of these people are schizophrenic or have some mental issues. So you never know, Clint.
What so other people as I mean people like the research teams, like the research teams like Anna is helping people, like helping people.
Yeah, there's a lot of them that there's different angles that come when people do it. Some people want to just know and experience. I had people that worked with me back in the day that they would have their own team, and they were young people, not only in age but experience, and so they didn't have the experience that I had. So I try to teach them and whatever. And I found that a lot of times, Clint, those people, once they had enough experiences and realized this stuff is real, they got out of the field. They had something to prove to themselves. So you got people out there that are curious, and they've heard about Bigfoot or ghost or whatever, and so they want to know the truth. And the only way they're going to find the truth is they go out and have an experience and try to use that experience to validate what they think might be possible. And sometimes, Clint, they're looking so hard that anything they don't understand now becomes evidence. And so you have to debunk the evidence or try to prove that it may not be real. But what you have to have is an open mind and be willing to admit that you spent hundreds and hundreds of hours in the field investigating, and then what you thought was evidence wasn't evidence. And people don't like to admit they just wasted their time. So I've seen it all, Clint. I've had good experiences. Um, we were able to debunk later, and you're a little upset, but you're like, but that's why we do this, and it's a good thing we do debunk. But you got teams out there that don't debunk and really question the evidence that they present. So that's the bad thing, and um, that's what gives a lot of teams out there potentially a bad name, because they just think that their evidence is
You know,
all that in a bag of chips, and it's not.
the team called the photo the photo something like that. Um,
You know,
it's
Clint, a lot of teams out there, and there's some that I know do really really good, and others I don't know anything about them, so I don't say anything about them. Um, but I can tell you there's a process, and it's just like in masonry, my hat, and that is, when you go into masonry, you go in as an apprentice, and then after a while, you get past the degree of fellowcraft, and then you become a master mason. And there's a process, and it's the same thing in learning, just like first grade going to 12th grade. You have to pass your way along and realize. And a lot of times when I talk to people that are a young team, up to about 5 years of research in the field, um, they probably learned some lessons a hard way. And I've always, told people that the best way to learn is learning from those that are experienced. A lot of people might want to do that, but some people want to learn on their own, and you can't teach them anything. And so when they have those type attitudes, I've seen it many times in the paranormal field. I just walk away from them, Clint. I won't talk to them because they've already got their minds made up. That they don't have the research time in the field. They haven't investigated. They're not investigators. You know, some of us are. And so when they have that attitude, it's just best to leave them alone. So help them out if you can. But a lot of people they almost take it like an insult. And my thought is, Clint, is you should always be willing to learn, what in anything you do. Maybe, I go fishing and I think I'm a pretty good fisherman, probably, better than average. But every once in a while, somebody shows me a little trick and it works. So you got to be willing to admit that you might not have it right.
Like how like I want to know of how you go how you get into this hobby, like how you get in this different hobby to research.
Well, let's just call it really, a lot of people don't know really, unfortunately, how to research, but let's say you're an enthusiast and you want to know. So, everything is measurable, Clint. Everything that you know and touch and feel and see is made of atoms. So you have to understand that and realize that everything can be measured in some way or another, Clint. So it's just like I'm going to pick up this ring. This ring has weight to it, it has size, it has measurements to it, and we can probably guess or whatever that it's a ring and it's made of metal. And so that's the whole background, Clint, is that you have to realize that in what you're dealing with and what you're looking for. And so then you have to realize that everything can be measured. So if it's a heavy bipedal like Bigfoot or Dogman or whatever, typically they're going to leave a track where a human wouldn't. I weigh about 170 pounds, and I can step where I've seen Bigfoot tracks, and I don't even make a mark, Clint. That's almost 200 pounds. So if they made a mark, they had to weigh, I would guesstimate, I don't know, there's ways to guess, but and measure. And they have formulas for that kind of thing. But I would guess these things are from between 400 and 600 pounds that left these tracks. And so even if it's the same size track I have, maybe a little larger, it could have come from somebody that's 6.5 feet tall or whatever. Okay, but I don't know anybody that's 6.5 feet tall. Typically, that weighs 400 pounds walking around barefooted on gravel. So some of this stuff you just really have to question. And so there's other things you look at in the footprint, like typically a Sasquatch print, Bigfoot print is going to be about as half as wide as the footprint is long. So there's things you can look at and say, yeah, that's interesting. That appears to be a human footprint, but there's other things in there like a metatarsal break in the middle, kind of like the palm of your hand. Humans don't have that. We can't flex our foot like that, but Bigfoot can, and there's certain things you can look for and see that it's probably not a human footprint. And so these are things you have to know, and you gain that knowledge from typically other people, just like an old man trying to show a boy that's 7 years old how to rig his line to go catfishing, kind of the same thing. And so people have to be teachable and learn, and then learn to do it better. Always be seeking a way to do it better. But, if I were to say the basic equipment, one of the best things that you really can have, I would say, is a voice recorder, because sound is 360 degrees. This camera is really good too, but it can only shoot, straight ahead. But the good thing about it is it has a microphone that's 360 degrees, as well. So a camera like this is pretty good. But really, a lot of your best evidence is always going to come from audio. So I would say, get a good camera, a voice recorder, and I have more equipment than anybody should have. And that is, I've got things like measuring EMF. I've only got a couple of those, but I used to have some high tech ones, and I left them with some of the pros team and haven't got them back, and I don't worry about them. But an EMF detector, voice recorder's good, a camera's good. The other thing I would say is, something to measure like a Geiger counter. Radiation is pretty good if you're dealing with cryptids and UFOs, because it's believed, Clint, that some of these cryptids and UFOs come through portals, and sometimes they may bring radiation or some sort of different disturbance, you know. So you want to be able to measure that. It just depends on what you want to do, Clint. But I would say a good voice recorder, a good camera, you know. If you're going to be doing work in the dark, you know, that's night vision, good luck, you know, trying to use cameras with infrared on them. A lot of cryptids, I believe, can see that, so they avoid it. You know, some of them not so much, but some of them do, you know. And so,
Uh,
go ahead.
so I have a question. Um, let me wait 1 second. Oh, so like Bigfoot is in like like in North, I guess.
Well, you know, Clint, the thing with Bigfoot, a lot of people, I know people, I don't want to make fun of them, but when the word Bigfoot seems to denote singular. So a lot of people, when you say Bigfoot, you know, it's like saying Marianne. And so people go, yeah, I know Marianne. Well, there's 100 million Mariannes out there, you know, and so they think there's only one Marianne, and so um, they realize that there's kind of like the Loch Ness monster. People talk about that. They say the same thing about the Loch Ness monster. They're under the impression, most people are, there's only one Loch Ness monster. I don't know of a time that a Loch Ness monster has been seen in pairs where they're seen at, you know, and there's several places, even like Lake Champlain and Vermont, I think it is in that area. People see them up there, and then you know Loch Ness. So people see them there and other places too. But um, there's more than one, you know, and so a lot of people think that there's only one Bigfoot, and so that's why they don't believe he's real. But these creatures, whatever you want to call them, Clint, I'll say there are people that developed differently than we did. You know, we came from the same direction, but they split off, and they're more built for the wilderness, you know, than we are. So, you know, with that said, it's kind of like pigs. You could take pigs and turn them loose, and I think by the next generation or two, the noses get longer instead of flat, and they begin to grow the tusk. You know, they need those tusks and that longer nose to root up, you know, food and stuff. So they make adaptations, and so a lot of people will say that Bigfoots are really human. So we'll just say they're humans too, or
Some people like some people, you know, some that s- s- I'm in the ham lady in my cub, my ham cub
yeah,
lady. She think it's not real.
yeah. But you know, that's because here's the thing, Clint. People do not investigate. And so what they heard is they've read something. And I've told you before, you know, most people have been indoctrinated through the educational system. Bigfoot's not brought up at school and taught, so it must not be real, you know? And then, you know, we've heard about Santa Claus, and every one of us has heard about Santa Claus and believed in it, and then realized it's not real. So they put Bigfoot and Santa Claus in the same bracket, you know? And it's not until they go out and see one, Clint, that you know, I've talked to a number of people that didn't believe in them until they had an experience. And you know, Clint, back in the days when I had the site with pros, and we had it for 10 years, there are a lot of people that didn't believe in ghosts until it happened to them, you know. And you know, the house I live in currently is haunted. Things happen here all the time. There's only two people here, and sometimes the lights are found left on in the kitchen. The other morning I got up and there was these mints scattered all over the floor in the kitchen, you know, that you get like when you go to um, you know, an Italian restaurant or something, you know, something like that, you know, Olive Garden. And I don't know how they got there. It wasn't the other person did it. I didn't do it. And, there's all kinds of things that happen, Clint. So at some point in time, people see enough evidence they're going to believe. But if they're not out there in the field, they have no reason to believe. Doesn't matter what you say.
Wow. I see. Wow. I saw the light is on.
So, anyways.
I see the light is on.
Oh, behind me?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
It's
because Marsha was in the kitchen, so
oh.
but those kind of things happen, and that's why I'm saying you have to debunk them, and understand what's going on. But if all the curtains were open right now, just started going up, I wouldn't bother me a bit because Clint, I've been dealing with this stuff for many years now, and um, but if you saw it, it would probably scare you. And that's the other thing. A lot of people have a misinterpretation of scary things when they happen. It's scary because it's not normal, so they react to it in a negative way, and they think that, you know, let's just say if it's a ghost and it's a disembodied spirit, whatever. And a lot of people don't believe in that. They believe everything's demons. But let's just say it's a ghost that does it. Um, they've been told that if anything paranormal happens, that it has to be a demon, and they did it to scare you. And it certainly scared me when that curtain raised or whatever. So now I know it's a demon, and that's how people think. So a lot of people don't, employ what they call critical thinking, Clint, and that's a problem, and um, I mean, I've so many things in my life, it doesn't scare me anymore. I've seen Bigfoot and whatever, and never got afraid of them. And people might say the same thing if they had that experience. It's not till you have that experience that it changes your life. And then once they come to face reality and what's really real out there, Clint, that's what makes all the difference. But a lot of people, they're never going to have those experiences, or they're going to ignore it in some cases. So that's just the way it works. And it could be that way with Bigfoot, ghost, or um, cryptids, like Nunnepedes or Duendes, that there's in South America and Latin America and other places, I think, where they call them that, maybe in Spain or whatever, um, where they see these little people, and they could be, this little, and then someone knee high, but they're all little people. It's kind of like you go fishing, and you're fishing with worms, and you catch a perch, and it's maybe this big on average, but then you catch a bass, he's this big, and then you catch a catfish. So they're all fish. Uh, but they're classified as something different, and so it's the same thing with cryptids. There's some have wings, and fly, like the Mothman and Jersey Devil and all kinds of things, Clint. So it just depends on where you are, what you might experience. So, you get people that they don't believe in ghosts, but they believe in Bigfoot. And then, I get people that'll tell me on Strange Oklahoma, they believe in ghosts, but they don't believe in Bigfoot. And then, the Bigfoot people say they don't believe in ghosts. So you get these two people, and they're going to butt heads. And they have realized that, these things are really interconnected, Clint, because with ghost and Bigfoot, there's a good possibility, and I'm not going to say you will, but there is a possibility, um, that you might see orbs. Um, you might hear weird sounds. You might have a feeling. You might have what some would call a telepathic experience. Um, and so there's a lot more in common than people realize. And a lot of people they don't know that these things come with the field of the supernatural, paranormal, and it's a human experience. And some people don't believe in it because, maybe their preacher told them that it's not true, and if it is, it all comes from the devil. But it's part of who we are, Clint, is humans. I've had many telepathic experiences. Um, More so with my brother than anybody. It could be something simple as I know he's going to call me or he's going to come by or whatever. I didn't have to call him. I just knew it. He was coming by at noon. Don't tell you how I can't tell you how I knew it. I just knew. And so these things are well recorded. You know, Bigfoot has a lot of telepathic experiences with people, um, and a lot of people have that experience. And then aliens are said to have that experience too. And one of the more known cases of it was back in the 1960s. Betty and Barney Hill. I think they were from New York, somewhere up northeast, and they had an encounter with some aliens, and they spoke to them telepathically and showed them a star system where they came from. And it wasn't until I think 30 years later that they found that star system or the stars that lined up. So that's a pretty good intuition that they got, and or that impression from the aliens. So these are all things that are in common with ghosts and aliens and cryptids and whatever that people choose to ignore until they have it. So, but there's so many experiences that people can potentially have that it's almost ridiculous. It could be like through telepathy. It could be taste. It could be a feeling. Anything that you can feel with you can see, touch, and sense with your senses. You can have that experience with telepathy. And I studied that in parapsychology, and Clint, this stuff is um, a lot more in depth than most people know. So, but yes, you can have all those experiences. It's all something in common with all of them. So, any other question?
Yeah, I I I do you see Be- Bigfoot knows how to how to survive and
Well, let me tell you this, Clint. Um, Talking with Native Americans, most of them will tell you that Bigfoot is a people. And like I said, we went one way in the scale, and they went the other, and they're more advanced than us. And not only do they have these gifts that they need to survive, they've enhanced them, and they know things. And so they know what plants to use to heal wounds or sickness and whatever. And a lot of the stories that I've heard over the years, that it was Bigfoot in the end that passed the information on what herbs or plants to use for healing. So they definitely know what to use. We can't go to the store and just buy bug spray to get bugs off us. So they've learned to use certain plants, like um, garlic and onions will keep insects off you. But they've got other ways to keep insects, like maybe using pine and cedar too. Those are just four off the top of my head. But there's other ones that they could eat and or brush on them, and keep the bugs off them. So they've learned